right. So, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. Namaste, namaskaram. Aditi had a great post about this yesterday about all the different ways to say hello in various South Asian languages. So welcome to our session today. We're talking about challenges that diaspora face in raising multilingual and multicultural families. And this is going to be a South Asian perspective. And by South Asia, I mean, it's not just India. Even though our panelists today are also from India, they are from all over the place. They've lived in various places in their lives. And for this context, the experience that we're talking about is often shared by people across South Asia, which includes Pakistan, Afghanistan, Nepal, Bhutan, Maldives, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. And so we're all kind of considered under this name of DESI, D-E-S-I. So that's what our experiences we're going to be sharing today. So let's keep going. So this is me. I'm Anita. Oh, it's the same shirt. I'm Anita Sachariah. I'm based in the Washington, D.C. area in the U.S. And I'm the founder of BhashaKids. And my goal is to grow multilingual and multicultural South Asian families in the diaspora. And we'll get to why I wanted to do that. It'll come very clear during this session. Our panelists today are Jessica Kumar of the Invisible India podcast, Richa Joshi of Dual Nations Design, as well as the Same But Different SSBD podcast, and Aditi Wardhan Singh of raisingworldchildren.com. They each come from very different backgrounds and perspectives. And what they do have in common is they all speak Hindi. So that may pop up in today's session. I totally welcome it. I would just ask that you guys translate for the rest of us. So I will begin. Today, the format will be some introduction to the topic. Then we are going to discuss 4 main questions among the panelists, and then open it up for questions for the last 15 minutes or so. So if you do have questions or comments, I would ask that you put them into the chat so we can make sure to gather them and reflect on them. And if you are not part of the panelists, I would ask that you be on mute for today until it's time for question and answer. So with that, we'll get started. Again, my name is Anita with BhashaKids. It's my small business is basically to create bilingual materials in 10 South Asian languages for children to learn through English. And I will ask, and my languages that I speak, I'm actually more fluent in Spanish and French than I am in my own heritage language of Malayalam. And if you caught Elikuti's presentation a couple hours ago, that is the language that I grew up with and my parents spoke. And I'm also learning Tamil now with my husband and teaching that to my kids. So I'd invite my panelists to introduce themselves. Let's start with Jessica.
Hi, everyone. Namaste. I'm Jessica Kumar. And although I do speak Hindi, I am not from India. I am from the US. I grew up in Chicago area. And my journey has taken me 15 years ago. I first stepped foot in India and I basically never looked back. So I've been living in India for around the last 15, 16 years. My partner, Abhishek, is from Bihar, which is where we live. And we work for a nonprofit organization, development and relief work. But I'm also the host of the Invisible India podcast, where we talk about cross-cultural issues of the lesser known aspects of Indian culture. And oftentimes that's through inviting stereotype breaking South Asian guests onto the show so that they can share their own perspective. Of course, we talk a lot about linguistics, parenting, raising children, and all of that. So thank you so much, Anita, for inviting me to be on this. Super excited to hear what everyone else has to say.
Thank you, Jessica. Richa.
Hi, everyone, and namaste. As you know, my name is Richa. I am the owner and founder of Dual Nation and the podcast, which actually launched this year. My heritage language is Hindi, but I started by learning German when my family moved there. And unfortunately, I didn't learn the Hindi alphabet or the numbers. However, having said that, I do speak a number of different languages. And the reason why I decided to go with dual nation is because, I mean, we're not going to stop migrating from whichever part of the country we're from, and we're not going to stop having babies. So there's going to be a lot of people with a lot of mixed nationalities. And this is about pride in whichever nationality they may call their own, or whichever blended ones. Very, very excited to be part of this tonight and looking forward to our discussions.
Thank you, Richa. Aditi?
Hello, namaste. I am Aditi, Raising World Children. I am author, publishing coach, and founder of Raising World Children. My journey has been from blogger to creating this online platform for writers around the world, because I thought we needed a place where people from different cultures and voices could come together. And I'm glad that we've now shifted to books, which is what I'm doing, is empowering multicultural families like mine. A little about me: I am Indian. I was raised in Kuwait, so I was constantly confused. Confused is not the word, but I wasn't boxed properly. And that often led me to feel, having that sense of unbelonging, as we say. But when I had kids, I realized that, my God, it's so wonderful, because I am so open to learning about the world, and so are my children. And I think that's where the name came from, where I believe that all of us are now living in a multicultural world. It doesn't depend on what your home is, but who's around you. And that's what I'm trying to do. And I have faced a lot of challenges in teaching my kids my heritage language, which is Hindi, because I think in English and I speak English equally. But my husband and I speak in English mostly. So more about that later. And that is why I think Anita invited me here, because I'm so passionate and I'm working on a couple of books for the same. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would love to hear your perspective later of what you would consider the third culture kid. We'll get to that. So a little bit about me. My name is Anita Sachariah Srinivasan. I'm an Indian American. I was born in New York and raised in Miami. My parents immigrated from Kerala, India, which is in South India. And I want to distinguish at the beginning of this, I want to make sure that we have two definitions at the top of our head, which is heritage language and mother tongue. And I'm going to not use these interchangeably. To me, they're very different. A mother tongue is what you're actually raised with. So I would say my parents' mother tongue was Malayalam, but I don't think I can claim that, because I was born and raised in the US and English was surrounding me. So I would say my heritage language is Malayalam. It's what I had inherited from my family, but was eventually, it's considered a minority language here in the US, and therefore it was crowded out by the dominant language, which is English. So we'll talk about now the questions we're going to be covering today. I'm going to just go through them quickly as an overview for you guys, but we're going to go through them one by one as the panelists. So we're going to be talking about immigration. What are the challenges that families face in passing on their language and cultures? Why are some people successful? Why do others simply just resign themselves to English? And I want to dive deeper into something that I don't think is often spoken about, but how does racism and xenophobia play a role in diaspora's willingness to teach their children their language? And finally, we'll end on a positive note about how do we move forward? What can we do today? Knowing how we all were raised, what can we do differently today to help people pass on our language? So coming back, we'll start here. So I will go with, we'll go Richa, Aditi, and Jessica in that order. So talking about your experience when families emigrate, what were the challenges that your families faced in passing on their language and culture to you, and how do you face that with your own kids?
So for me, what happened was, because we moved around a lot because of my father's job, they wanted us to feel very, very comfortable in whichever country and language that was surrounding the community language of that area, because they wanted us to settle in. So instead of growing up with Hindi and learning the alphabet, just like I did mentioned in my introduction, I learned German first. And maybe because it's from that generational learning that I had with them, when we decided to make this move from India and migrate to Australia, I wanted our son to have the comfort of the language that he would be surrounded with, which would be English. So that's where my challenge started. I wanted him to understand, him and my daughter to understand and be accepted with the English language, because I purely felt that if they could not speak and be understood by their peers around them, then they might feel isolated, or they would not be understood and not be able to express what they wanted to say. So I focused a lot on them learning English and, and being conversant in it. In hindsight, I do believe that I should have started young with them with Hindi. We do speak in Hindi at home. They dance very, very lovingly to, what is it, Ek, Do, Teen, Char, or whatever, Lungi dance and everything as well. They do all of that. And they do understand Hindi when we speak to them, especially if I'm scolding them. But they're not able to speak back as easily. And that challenge has been also because we are surrounded more by English-speaking families rather than just Hindi-speaking families or Gujarati or whichever the other language it might be. So when that happens, kids learn from other kids much faster than what their mama tells them, right? So that has been a challenge for us to pass the language. And with regards to the culture bit, we do the Holi, the Diwali, the Eid, the whole 9 yards. So they do understand that, and they do understand the epics and all that stuff. But it's hard when it is concentrated only amongst the Indian community. Not like back home, you go in and that entire colony is celebrating with you, whichever part of the. So that has been some of the challenges that we've had in making that continuous thing happen for them.
Thank you. Okay, Aditi.
So a little about my life growing up. I studied in Indian school, Kuwait. So Hindi was taught as a language in, at par at English. So that is why it was never a thing. And my parents never consciously wanted one or the other. They just were living their lives, and Hindi was spoken at home. But I was surrounded by English-speaking friends, teachers, and our neighbors too were Christians. So I was pretty much in that environment. So similar like Richa, when my kids were born, it was very natural for me to just speak in English because, and I never even thought about it, because your first kid is like your experiment kid, as they say, because you are learning to be a mother. And it was a way, he understands Hindi very well, just like exactly how Richa said, when you're scolding them, they understand. If you're talking about them in Hindi, they understand. But when it comes to learning or speaking, I have seen that my son had a kind of rebel. He didn't want to, because he didn't feel the need. He would say, Mama, I don't need to learn, right? Because I don't have to speak it anywhere. His grandparents, I encouraged them. I said, can you please speak to them in Hindi? But both of them are very fluent, like both sides are very fluent in English. So their need to connect with the child was more than their need to want to teach them the language. So they would be like, okay, they would just keep speaking to them in English as well. So, and my friends as well, the same thing. So I would be like, we should, I was the one pushing friends. But then again, like if their circle is not Hindi speaking or any language predominantly speaking, I think the children don't feel the need. It's when my daughter developed an interest. She is much more into Bollywood movies, and like they both watch with me. But my daughter is like, now she speaks. She likes showing off that, I know a second language. So it's at the age of 8, my son, kind of got over the thing. I put him in Hindi school. When he saw other kids are learning, then he realized that, oh, this is something cool that, maybe there's some advantages to this. And then it stopped, that push stopped. And that is when he became a little bit open. My daughter is much more open to learning and speaking now. She can speak quite fluently, quite a lot. But my son is still like, he struggles with words because he just doesn't delve into himself. And I think it's just a matter of time, because now that he's open, I think it's much more easier for me to teach him and ask him, okay, so what are you trying to say? So try this. And I do it more, and I still have to keep, reminding myself, nahi, you have to speak in Hindi. Hindi mein baat karo. Like talk in Hindi to myself in my own head. I have to push my husband and say, "What? Speak in Hindi with them." But it's just like, it's our, I think it's, I don't know. I think it's for us also, it's a little difficult, because when you think in English, it's very difficult to constantly switch ourselves. And I think that's where a little bit we had an issue. But yeah, that's how it has been for us.
Thank you, Aditi. It's the same in our household. I'm constantly telling my husband, Tamil pesa, please just speak to them in Tamil. And a funny thing about when we first got married, the only language we had in common was English. And he lamented to me, oh, I never thought I'd be speaking English the rest of my life. Which was then I was like, okay, well then I'm going to learn Tamil and Hindi and Malayalam better, so we can raise our family, not with only English. So Jessica, tell us about your experience raising your family in India.
Sure. So as I mentioned in the beginning, I'm an American living in India. So for us, it's so easy to speak English in our world today. It is so, people in Bihar where we live, it's not as easy for most of the population if you're not naturally connected with Western culture, or if you're in a very, kind of low closed community. So in India, it's so easy to find English learning resources, and everyone is going crazy for, Christmas and Halloween and all these things where, and people are always asking, oh, can you teach me English or this and that? And actually, for my kids, even in India, being in a very heavy Hindi centric environment, we still have to work at it. We still have to work at fluency in Hindi, because I think the way people perceive us is that my kids are American, even though they both have brown skin, dark eyes, they both have Hindi Sanskrit names, but people look at us and think, well, you're American. So actually my kids have to struggle as well, even living in India. We don't live in a large metropolitan, Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, all this. We live in Bihar, and still we have to struggle. So I think there's an immense amount of, societal wave, especially if you're in, a developing country, if you want to call it that, or a community which is really the one way to progress and become a global citizen is to learn English. If you're already in that kind of pressure, the tide is against you. So I think that's a challenge, even for me and my kids. The one thing we do have going for us is that, well, two things. One is that we have people around us speaking Hindi all the time. That they're the maid, the house helpers coming in. My in-laws do not speak English well at all. My mother-in-law वो बोली कि अरे मैंने बहुत कोशिश किया और मैंने छोड़ दिया, हमसे नहीं होता है ये सब चीज, अंग्रेजी बस हो गया. So she completely just gave up on trying to learn Hindi, English. And when she was about 40 years old, she's like, I'm too old for this, it's never gonna happen. So we have a good environment for my kids if they have good support system. But still, even with all these things, we still have to really put an effort with speaking with them, having exercises with their writing and reading and all that. I mean, so we're in a slightly different situation than you, but there's a lot of similarities actually.
Thank you. And I think something that echoes through all of what we've just said is making that conscious effort. It's just not something that's going to happen by osmosis, that we as parents have to strategize and have to have a roadmap for how are we going to raise these kids with these languages, and even understand what is our expectation. Do we want them to be verbally fluent, or do we want them to be literate? Or what do we hope that they can achieve? And so that in itself, it's just not something that you can take for granted. We do have a question here that I thought we might as well take right now, is about how old are your children and what difference have you noticed when the years have passed in terms of their knowledge of their second or third or non-English language? I would say, just to answer, my kids are now 7 and 10. And as Aditi said, something is happening around age 7 here with my daughter, where she is very, very interested in learning how to read and write Tamil. And it's something that I started with her because I wanted her to understand how to pronounce the words. And there are sounds that exist in Tamil that do not exist in English. And the only way for me to demonstrate that to her was to show her the Tamil alphabet and explain this is a completely different character and you have to use your mouth differently. And for me, it was very important to teach them about this different pronunciation skills at a young age, because it's so hard now. Here I am in my 40s to try to learn it now, because I don't even have the comprehension, the listening comprehension when people make certain sounds like Tamil, Tamil is really Tamil, Tamizh. I'll type it in the chat. It's not even an L. So it's hard to understand what those sounds are. But I did start very early with them, and it was a function of not imposing it on them, but learning with them. And by having that approach, they've been much more open to it. But we have a lack of resources, and we don't have a big community here. We're pretty isolated from a lot of the other Desis. And here my friends are Gujaratis, they speak Telugu, they speak Kannada. All Desis make friends with each other. Then that's your group. So it's hard to find a very homogenous group in which my kids would be continually exposed to the language, unless it's something that we actively sought out or I drove many hours to have that experience. So Richa, Jessica, Aditi, let's hear from you.
For me, my kids are 7 and 10 as well. I think we're all almost around the same age when it comes to our panelists. The difference that I've noticed is that our son started by reading comic books. So Ram, Krishna, all those different ones came out in comic books. And he started reading it, and that's when he got interested in language. It's not that we didn't speak to him in Hindi, but because he wasn't ready. And in India, the way I grew up, I'm not very sure how it happens, and Jessica might be able to say that now, but Hindustan mein, you're forced to write. It doesn't matter whether you can hold the pen or not, or the pencil, you are forced to write. So when that happens, yes, Jess, I can see you go like, oh. So it's being forced, whether it is ratto. So that kind of thing was something that I was very, very against when I was in India and growing up in America and in Europe and here when I see my children. So I never forced that language on them. And I hope I say this right, Anya. So he showed that interest initially. My daughter, she wasn't interested at all, till she saw the stuff that Auntie Anita from BhashaKids said, and she said, oh, Billy, so that's when she picked up. And I remember calling Anita and saying, mate, what have you done to my children? And it was that easy. So it's about the resources as well. I hope that answers your question from my end, Anya.
Go ahead, Jessica.
Okay, sure. Yes, my children are 7 and 4, so a bit younger. And it's so interesting because my son, his first 2 years of life were in the US, but we were militant about speaking Hindi with him. Even the first words I spoke to him were in Hindi when he was born. I was just we were forceful. Then when we moved to India, we slowly just kind of like, there are a lot of other people speaking to him, and it actually worked out just fine. So he's quite fluent in Hindi. He can read and write because, like Richa said, you have to in school. If you're going to be in any kind of school, you have to learn to read and write. And it is tough because especially a lot of the characters are quite complex. And so even for the local kids, they always start with the Roman script in India, at least in North India. They say start with the Roman script. It's more straight lines, easier to remember, and then they advance onto Devanagari script. So my son is doing great with that, and he's quite fluent in. And even when we come to the U.S., he's very proud to be a Hindi speaker. And I was a little nervous that he was going to have this sense of, oh, that's weird, or people are going to treat me weird. But he's been very confident with his, if someone asks him if he speaks Hindi, he just starts speaking. Mujhe aata hai, aapko aati hai kya Hindi? And people are like, well, I don't speak Hindi. I was just asking if you did. So I'm very proud of him. He doesn't have this sense of shame or embarrassment, and I hope it stays that way. With my daughter, who's 4, we've had some interesting, she was very fluent in Hindi. Her first 3 years of life until we made our first long trip to America, and she just shut down. Everything got buried. And I don't know why. We would speak to her, she just wouldn't speak back to us. So it was kind of strange. And then finally we went back to India, and she started building up. And now she's learning to read and write as well. And she's a little more studious. She likes the whole Batakiliko kind of environment, or just sit and write for 5 hours. She likes that. So that is one difference between them, as that, because they're having this upbringing where he was born in the US, she was born in India, and I hope they'll both end up in the same place where they're confident in speaking and reading and writing. Someone just asked a question. I'll just answer real quick, and then I'll pass the mic to Aditi. But do we have resources for children as far as books and whatnot? I know that Anita does, and I know that these other ladies probably have good ones too. I'll just share mine on my website. I created a little guide. It's a Hindi learning starter kit for kids, and I want to make one for adults as well. But it's basically a list of resources. Most of them are just books and movies, and books and movies which I think actually have good content, which is palatable for kids. It's on my website, invisibleiNdiaPodcast.com, and you should see a little sign up. You just put your email and download it. It's a free download. So that's where some of my recommendations are. And of course, I'm going to shamelessly plug Anita with her stuff, BhashaKids. My kids have enjoyed her flashcards, particularly in the coloring book, the Rangoli, the coloring book. We really like that. And I even did reviews on it on my YouTube, so you can look it up. But yes, passing the mic now.
Thank you. Go ahead, Aditi.
I think I almost already answered this. Like my kids, when they were young, we could make out that he understands Hindi completely. Like when his grandparents would come and talk about him, he would answer them in English. So they were like, "Arey, isko Hindi aati hai," like he knows Hindi. And they would be surprised. And I said, yes, he understands, but he's got this little bit of, I think the only struggle he had was, why should I speak? Do I even need to speak? Kind of, I think that's somewhere where we should have like just stopped and said, no, we won't respond till you say something in Hindi to us. But of course, that's hindsight. But yeah, and over time, and at around the age of 4, I even realized that he's like, I don't want to wear Indian clothes, right? Why are you forcing me? And I kind of reflected, and I realized that I don't want to push my culture on him. I want him to want to imbibe it. And I think that transitioned for him around like 8 years, where he would be like, okay, no, I want to, because I realized that what is fun for him, and I put things in his words. So it was like, okay, he likes wearing jackets. So I got him a lot of Indian jackets. So I don't really care if he wears jeans, a t-shirt, and then an Indian jacket on top. When I started watching Bollywood movies that were specifically funny or had action, which was what I realized he likes. And then that thing transitioned. So it always takes time for us to realize what our kids love. My daughter is a girly girl. So she was like, oh, the girls are all dressed up pretty. And she was happy. And that's what made me realize that, wait a second, what about my son? So he would watch Krish, and then I would make him watch some movies our problem is also my husband doesn't watch TV at all. So it's just, I have to like consciously every time make an effort that no, we are do this. I have to hype it up and have a plan, and I have to make it like a family bonding experience. And over time, like now at age of 10, now he's still learning. He's not comfortable speaking, but he's much more open to discussing. But again, for mythology stories and all, we went to someone's house the other day, and my daughter was telling them a story that on the Golu, I think there's like a step thing, and you decorated for the Navratri festival, and someone had decorated, and I was asking their children, like, what is that? And they were a little blank because they're younger. And my daughter said, Mama, I know the story. And then she said the whole story. And I was like, which story is this one? so again, I like language is of course very important for me because I want them to empathize. I think bilingualism and multilingualism is great for building empathy as well. But yes, it was around 6 to 7 for my daughter and 8 to 10 for my son, where that little bit of pushback stopped.
Thank you, Aditi. And I'm putting something in the chat now. The number one recommendation is Amar Chitrakatha, which is the be-all end-all of all graphic novels and comic books in India. And that started way long ago. Every single Hindu mythology is illustrated. Every single person of note, of import is illustrated in the story. And that is how my son started reading the Mahabharata at age 6, but through comic book form. And sometimes I regret it at the time. I was like, it's so violent. They're cutting off each other's limbs and they're killing elephants. But that's how that was fine. And he was very excited and interested about that. And same, Aditi, we watch comedies and we're not yet on too much on the action films, but comedies, my son is there. And same, I also have to drag my husband for everything, which that should be a whole nother session about how do we get the dads involved. We'll plan that separately. I've typed it in the chat. It's Amar Chitrakatha.
Yeah, just a note for Amar Chitrakatha. If your kids don't like violence, like my son, he is a complete Avengers guy, but he couldn't stand the violence in Amar Chitrakatha. So if your kids are sensitive, it's okay. There are some other resources. I can put those links there. Even speaking of resources, my website has a lot of movie recommendations and book recommendations for the same. I just want to put that out there. But yes, so if your kids are averse to violence, Amar Chitrakatha, you need to provide a lot of context sometimes, and things are very literal compared to metaphorical. So sometimes you need to read it first. I needed to do that a lot with my kids to explain to them. They'll be like, but how is this? And I would, because they are very logical thinking, both my kids. So that was a little bit of a transition. So just a disclaimer for everyone.
We all have resources on our sites, and all the links will be up on the last slide here. But I'd like to get on to the next question. And this also came up in Eloquenti's session about the prevalence of English and why is it so prevalent. And I'm going to put a theory out there. It's something that I've been thinking about lately from the immigrant experience and trying to put myself in my parents' shoes. Was English was their ticket to get out of India and to what they thought would be a better and more prosperous life that would help all of their family. And I think this is one of the driving forces for many immigrants is I've got to learn English and I've got to learn it well so that I can function. It's fine, I'm multilingual. I speak many different languages from living in India, or wherever I am from South Asia. But there I go to Australia or Kuwait or the US. I have to know English and I've got to know it well. And then when you have another, sorry about that, could everyone be on mute? Thank you. But when you have kids, how do you translate that? What I see a lot of families doing, and I think this was true in my own home, was my kids have to know English first, no matter what. And then what is sacrificed? Their mother tongue and your heritage language. And when you are not living in India, and you're not spending that time there, you really have to double down and have that conscientious effort to teach your kids and find those resources. And I often, one of the most common things that I get from curious parents, they partly feel like, well, should I teach my child now when they have a young toddler or they have a baby? And they're like, well, I don't want it to affect their English. And they've somehow equated this myth that by teaching them Hindi or whatever it is the language, my child will end up with a speech disorder and they will not learn English. And it is a myth. It's totally not proven by the science. Unfortunately, I've seen it pushed by doctors. I've seen it pushed by teachers. I've seen it pushed by the school system. Depends on where you live. It depends on your environment. I've seen it pushed by other aunties and uncles. So again, it's not grounded in science and it's a myth. But when you're a parent, you know, people, they play on your FOMO, right? They play on your fears because your number one thing is, I want the best for my child. But then they end up with what? A 10-year-old, a 12-year-old who's completely disconnected from their culture and their language. They can't have a conversation with their grandmother, their uncles or aunties or cousins back in India at all. And then they feel disconnected, not just in an effort to not be disconnected from where you are right now, speaking English in the US or wherever you are, you've disconnected them from their heritage and their culture. So that's my take on it. And I would invite Richa, Jessica, and Aditi in that order.
I have nothing honestly to add to this because you've said everything. I will reflect and say that when my now 7-year-old started speaking and understanding what she was saying in Hindi because of your flashcards, Anita, it was really nice to see, because what I did see on her face was that connection. So at that time, and that very evening, by the way, after I made those videos for you, I did speak with my husband and said, did I make a mistake by pushing English on my children? Because I wanted them to be understood and not be othered and because we're coming to Australia after all. So that was there. So I have nothing else to add beyond the fact that thanks, Anita. बाकी सब आप लोगों के ऊपर है, आप बात करिए और मैं क्वेश्चंस पढ़ती हूँ.
Jessica.
Sure. Well, I just wanted to add, everything that you both said, I think, was the foundation for what I'm about to say. But there's this very harmful wave of, English learning, especially in the diaspora community, what we're talking about right now. And then, oh, but what about Hindi? What about Telugu? What about Tamil? You don't know that? Are you not Indian enough? How are you not Indian anymore? Did your parents not teach you? What's wrong with you? It's like okay. And I think part of the issue is that the parents are still, in a lot of senses, and I know none of you are in this boat at all. A lot of parents or grandparents from this mentality, old school mentality, are trying to push the English. It's just the way that they were brought up. It's the pushing the English, and then all these other Indian languages you just learn automatically, right? Because you're in India, you're just around people. Thoda sa Hindi sikho, thoda sa ye sikho, thoda Marathi sikho, Punjabi sikho, because you're just around people and you're kind of learning it from being out and having the TV on all the time, or people coming in and out of your house. So that's it. We don't have that in the West at all. There's no one coming in and out of your house. You're not really interacting with people. When you go buy your vegetables, you don't have to talk to anyone. कुछ भी नहीं बोलना है, बस जाके अपना कार्ड को स्वाइप करो, बस हो गया. You just go in the line at the store, take your credit card, swipe it, and walk out. In India, you have to interact with so many people to do the simplest task. So it's a totally different way. You have to be there are people who are not, but it is so easy to be multilingual in India. So very odd way of thinking, and somehow people never made that switch over, of realizing, oh, actually my kids don't have any of the support system that I had to learn multiple languages. So we do have to adopt, like you're saying, other methods of giving them some other support in ways that they learn, whether it's little resources or flashcards or other audio resources. So I think that's, I want to say one other thing that's kind of a funny thing. This is definitely white privilege coming through every single day of my life, but it's whenever my kids are speaking Hindi in India, they're praised. Oh, aap to bahut sundar Hindi bolte hain, ye wo. But people are like, oh, your kids speak both in languages. I'm like, so do yours. So do your kids. So all the people who are raising their kids in India in North India, I'm talking specifically, they all speak English and Hindi and probably other languages too. So why are you praising my kids? Because the end result is exactly the same. It's because, yes, I've come from a different country. I've learned this and that, and it's quite different. But the end result for your kids and my kids is the same. So why are we all excited?
Thank you,
Passing.
Jessica. I'm going to put a pin on that white privilege comment to the next question, and we'll get to that. And so, Aditi, again, the question is simply, why are some families successful? Why is there a focus on English? Why do some people give up and only focus on English?
Well, I have actually quite a few stories to share on this, but I'll just quickly touch upon the points. Is one, for some reason, I think, and I hate talking about it, but it's from when Indians had that perspective that, British Raj may English speaking people would get a better job. And it's just flowing down from there, I feel. For some reason, being fair skinned is better. For some reason, speaking English is better. For some reason, no matter how educated we are, we see a fair skinned person who speaks English fluently, or especially with an accent, we somehow become lower. I have no idea why that is. I've seen it in my friends. I've seen it in my parents. My mom comes, she's amazing English speaker, but our American neighbor comes over, she's like, can you ask her where she got her shoes from? I said, Mom, you speak English, you can ask her yourself. She said, and that's it. That's one idea. Look into why these things happen. Second, my husband had a friend growing up, and his maid would speak one language, his father, mother, two languages, and the daycare person was speaking a fourth language, English probably. He didn't speak anything till he was 4 years old. Okay. And everyone got worried. They thought he had a speech disorder, whatever, everything. Finally, when he started speaking, he was fluent in all 4 languages. And he went on to becoming this, high class person. He's an IAS now and everything. It's rare cases like this that build on this myth. One person tells a story to another. They don't talk about the aspect that he was speaking all 4 languages when he did start speaking, because children are imbibing stuff. If you're bombarding with them and not making them interact with you, they are going to be imbibing instead of projecting. So, but those cases, you just, it's like you don't focus on the positive. You tend to think that, till 4 years he wasn't speaking. Because I have parents who contact me saying that, my kid is 2.5 and he's not speaking. I said, my son started speaking at 3.5. It's not a competition. It's fine. Let your kid take their time and things. And I think it applies to a lot of things where we parents take pressure for things that are, more societal than internal. We don't focus on what it means to, like you said, Anita, that was beautiful, that you're disconnecting from one place. And I didn't even do it consciously, but it happens. And that is why it's so urgent for me. My husband says, why are you forcing them? It's fine. I said, but I don't want them to, because speaking the heritage language with your family, it's different. It is, it's a fact. You can't deny it. And the third thing is, movie like Hindi medium, if anyone's watching it, please watch it with subtitles. It gives you a look into what Anita is asking. Why, even in India, there's this thing that, being an English medium school or convent educated, I don't know if you guys remember, when I was young, convent educated was a fancy thing because you were taught by nuns and everyone assumed that you would have the best English possible. And I think that movie Hindi medium sums this whole question up, and it's a great look into, the life of a person and the pressure. A lot of parents feel that, my children should know English because a lot of people around them, like now my kids will probably, and I have heard comments, your kids don't speak Hindi, they're not Indian, like, how, people were saying. And it's the reverse in a lot of other places where, English is not so good, huh? Like, kya farak padta hai? What difference does it make? But again, all society and all these preconceived notions and stuff.
Thank you, Aditi. So holding on to that thread, let's go to the next question and get at, besides a lack of access to resources or opportunity to have a community who's speaking around you, what do you think about the role of racism and xenophobia? What do they play in the ability of a diaspora family teaching their kids their heritage language? And I think I would just comment, and I would actually throw to Jessica first, but now Jessica and I had a great conversation at the first Lingua-Cultura conference that we were at, that we were describing our situation about both of us learning languages. And I was, sharing about when I was growing up, every time I tried, one of the reasons I made my products is because I knew if I had them when I was a child, I would be more fluent in Malayalam today. And I really tried, and I asked my parents, please teach me. And when we went to India twice, I went when I was 6 and I went when I was 19. And I sat there with my cousins, please teach me. All I got was ridicule and being made fun of, being mocked. That, when I told people I'm trying to learn, when I would try to speak, people would be like, oh, that's nice, or just, oh, listen to her talk, but not encouraging. I can't think of one person that encouraged me to learn Malayalam other than my little baby cousin who was trying to teach me. But Jessica had related, she had a very different experience learning to speak Hindi and how she was encouraged. So I'd like to hear about your experience and your take on this question, Jessica.
For diaspora desis, it's a double-edged sword, because, like we've talked about, right? Because there's this push that, oh, you're not American enough or Australian enough or British enough, but then with your desi relatives, you're not desi enough. So it's really, and it's because of language or whatever. Even if you don't speak perfectly, then you have an accent, or this constant criticism. And it's really tough. I have a lot of compassion and empathy, because it is it's a very difficult position to be in, and way to kind of have an identity crisis in a way. And I see that, and it's unfair. And especially what's annoying is when people will look at me, a white person who's learned the language. I mean, honestly, I didn't have, I did have barriers, of course, but not the same barriers. When I would try to learn, I was stumbling over something. Sometimes people would just give up and say, Aditi, just speak in English with me. I'm like, okay. But a lot of times there was praise. There was, I would say something like the smallest little sentence. Oh, आप हिंदी बोलती हैं, इतना साफ क्यों बोलती हैं, कैसे सीखे, कहाँ से सीखे, where did you learn, how do you speak so clearly, you're speaking so nicely. I could have said 2 words and it would have been like, the clapping would start. So there's this very, racist, I would say, even, or just this white privilege of this leftover colonialism, internalized colonialism happening, where, you have to realize, and I'm only going to speak to the white people here, because I'm not about to give advice to anyone except for my own group here. So my talk actually next right after this is about this topic. It's about identity, about knowing your place, and about how to practice cultural humility while learning a language. If you're in a position like me where you were not forced through immigration or war or famine or whatever to a different place to learn a new language, I've learned by choice, because I wanted to expand myself, or because I wanted to learn something new, right? This is a very privileged thing. And so for that being said, I had barriers, but it was so fluid. There was so much praise along the way. There was so much encouragement. And I think as a person, if you are in that position learning, you have to be very careful about that praise, because people will be very quick to compare you. I can't tell you how many forums I've been asked to speak at as the MC of a Desi event, or of a whatever. I'm not Desi. Why are you asking me? Because I'm this little shiny white person that's going to make everyone go, wow. And people often use me as a tool of shame to compare to their American-born or Canadian-born Desis. Like, "Arey dekho ye kitna acha bolti hai, tum nahi bolte ho." Why you look at her, look at how nice she speaks. She learned. You can't even learn, and you're Indian. Like, whoa. So as a person who is learning, I think it's our responsibility to stop that kind of language immediately, and say, okay, listen and kind of explain some of these other barriers that are in the way. So I know I got a little overly verbose there, but there's more coming in the next talk. But please, let's hear from the next person.
Thank you. And guys, do stay on. I think it's on this channel too. So stay on for Jessica's talk. I love hearing, first of all, thank you for being such an ally and being so aware of your experience and how different it is from mine or Richa's or Aditi's. And I love that internalized colonialism from our own community that is a barrier to teaching and learning your heritage language. Richa and Aditi, I would pose to you a slightly different question. Have you encountered instances of racism or xenophobia related to your speaking your language and teaching your kids?
I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. Dekho, just like Jessica, I'm not Desi enough to be an Indian. I'm not Western enough to be Western, so I walk these 2-3 different worlds, and this internalized racism, listen, I'll drop a big secret. That's how I started in my coaching field, because I had this beautiful accent and I was this America return chick, so that worked in my favor at that time, 20 years ago, right? So I'm like, bhai, dekho, desi log jo hain, they're going to look at this white chick, half white chick, who's got this accent and she's very American in her ways and talking, and they're going to give me a job. And thankfully I was trained as a coach as well, so that was good. But that's how I got my first job coming back into India. I played on that very strategically because I knew that's what's going to work, right? Sharam aati hai, apne desiyon pe bhi kabhi-kabhi sharam aati hai, और Western people के ऊपर भी शर्म आती है. Just like Aditi said before, I think in English first nowadays. I remember telling you, Anita, once, dude, I'm dreaming in bloody English now. There's something wrong here. Like गालियाँ भी MCBC नहीं निकलती है, वो English वाली निकलती है. It's become that way. So there's something going on here, but that's also growing up, right? So that's what I have faced. As a child growing up, coming back to India, every time my dad said, okay, project's over, chalo ghar chalte hain, and everything, and coming back to the same house, same country, same everything else, and being like, aa gayi wapas, aur kya seekha? Arey tujhe to Hindi bhi nahi aati. Which basically says, oh, you're back, like the bad penny that comes back kind of a thing. And what did you learn? And, what did you learn and everything else. So dono sides say when you get that kind of thing, then it's really hard. It's really hard. So what do I say that will answer that question beyond what I've just expressed? Aditi, I'm sure you'll have more on this because you, me, and Jessica, in our own ways, along with Anita, we are TCK kids. Yeah. We live and breathe that culture, and our kids do the same thing. I'd love to hear what you have to say, Aditi.
How come you have been brought up in Gulf and you have this accent? I couldn't hear my accent. How come you have lived in America for so many years and you don't have an Americanized accent yet? That's another thing I've heard. How come you stay at home, work full time from home, and your kids still don't know how to speak Hindi? But kaun banata hai ye rules? Who makes these rules? No one. I get constantly overwhelmed and of not understanding where people's empathy goes, or where people's understanding that simple thing that we all are different. Our learning curves are different. Our teaching styles are different. The way we imbibe things are different. A lot of people go to US for a vacation and they come back with an accent and they're heralded. It's true. We've all seen it. I have friends in Kuwait who I meet and they have a more Americanized accent than I have. When I got a job in Dell in 2004, that was because I was one of the biggest, the best trainees, because I was a Gulf returned girl, and my dressing and my accent and everything was most neutral, I would say. So that is also one thing that adds up to your accolades. That and people perceive, and it's all about perception. It's all about, and that is a fear that we often have. Like, I wonder tomorrow, what are my kids going to think? Yesterday, Jyoti shared something. She's been featured on Target, Mama Jots. And I loved that one sentence that she said, which resonated with me so much, where she said, I have imposter syndrome about being Indian. And I feel that we are all made to feel that. And I think that is not something I want carried forward to my children, which is why I do everything I do. And which is why I think we all are doing everything we're doing to make people realize that, hey, you know what, this is another way of thinking, another way of teaching, another way of speaking. It's just a way of life, and that's it. So yeah, that those are the kinds of comments I get and have gotten all my life.
Thank you, Aditi. And we are pretty much at the end of our time. I see that we've gotten a question here about sibling rivalry, which I think that I will try to get the panelists to answer that in a different forum, and I'll post the answer up on my blog, which is at BhashaKids.com. And I'm just going to jump over to our resources. You know, the last question is, how can we support parents? But I think a lot of that came out in this session today with Jessica's guides to how to teach your kids Hindi and all the resources, about Aditi's writings about how to raise multicultural families, and providing platforms for so many Desi authors, and for Richa's work with just her simple branding of you can be both at the same time. You can be Indian and Australian and have twice the pride. It's not a divided pride. That's something that I love about her. So this is where you guys can find us. I will capture these questions and we'll try to answer them in a different format and put that up on BhashaKids.com. But I want to be respectful for Jessica, who should be starting in a few seconds. So, and I'll get the last bit of one tiny piece of advice. Richa, Jessica, Aditi. 10 seconds.
My only advice is to start unlearning what you've learned from before, and then relearning everything you've learned. The world is changing, not just the last 22 months. The world is changing, and there are more people everywhere. Just keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, and your hearts open.
I would say, be proud and be Desi, and be I think that having pride in the language, even if it's a little tiny bit, even if it just goes as far as namaste and happy Diwali, or Shubh Navratri, whatever, just I think being happy with that, and just like encouraging your kids in the small ways. And I just want to make a note that my website's actually invisibleiNdiapodcast.com, not invisibleiNdia.com. That's it.
Apologies about that. Sorry.
No problem.
My advice would be to find what works with your child. Simple as that. If repetition works, do that. If they love imbibing through books, use that. Whatever resources, there are so many out there. Hang in there. There's no later time. Anita's learning languages now. I am trying to learn how to teach my kids. We're all constantly learning from each other, with each other. So just hang in there and trust that what you're doing will work out one way or the other.
Okay. And my last piece of advice is just, as everyone here is a language learner knows, is you just got to be consistent. And even if it's that 5 or 10 minutes a day that you're spending with your child, all of it matters. All language inputs matter. And just the most important thing is to have a positive mindset about it, and know it's not a goal that they're going to be completely fluent in reading completely in Hindi by age 18. No, you're just building a platform for a foundation for them to become language learners. So thank you, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you for Richa for staying up very late. And we'll hopefully catch this recording on YouTube later. Goodbye, everyone.
Greetings, everyone. Just a minute. I'm just going to give everyone a minute to get back in, and then I'll get started. All right, if I can ask everybody just to mute themselves real quick, that would be great. So hello, polyglots. Namaste, assalamu alaikum. I'm Jessica Kumar, writer and host of the Invisible India podcast. I live full-time in North India, where I've been for almost 15 years. Currently, my partner Abhishek and I and our 2 children live in Bihar, India, where we work in development and relief. But I am originally from Chicago, US. Today's talk is about identity and how learning a new language can shape and form your cultural and personal view of self. But first, I'm going to make a really important distinguishment that there are 2 types of language learners or acquirers. There's push versus pull. In the push category, we have people who are displaced. Maybe that's from war, severe economic hardship, famine. Many refugees fall into this category. And as a result of this displacement, they become fluent in another language and or languages to survive in their new context. And yet we tend to overlook this category of people quite a bit in the polyglot and language acquisition learning community. In the second category, we have pull, which is basically a person who is learning because they are interested. They want to advance their career. They're in a relationship with someone from a different language group, and they also want to learn their partner's language. So there are many reasons, but I want to distinguish those 2 types before we dive in and start talking. The first kind of identity is one that's kind of forced upon oneself. But those are in the push category, whether they were pushed out of their country or region. A lot of those people tend to hold closely to their roots. They tend to dig down. The more heavily a people group is persecuted, oftentimes the stronger they will hold on to their roots, languages, or cultural identifiers. Maybe some of you have this story. When my daughter was born in India, my husband and son and I traveled from our smaller city for the pristine hospitals of South Delhi. We stayed for up to 6 weeks in Majnu-Katilla, which is a Tibetan colony in northern Delhi. The community is basically made up of refugees from Tibet who have built a community for themselves. On small patches of land given by the government, they've now built a beautiful community with the smallest alleyways you could possibly imagine, winding through vertical restaurants, spas, illegal gambling hideaways, and under the table buffalo meat kebab stands, which are not common in 99% of other parts of India. The thing we realized upon living there is that many of these youngsters held a Tibetan refugee passport, but they had never been to Tibet. So they're not fully accepted as Indian, nor were they fully even allowed to go to Tibet. Their citizenship status is somewhere in between. This realization hit me very strongly when we were walking through the gullies one evening and we saw a t-shirt hanging up in a shop. It said, Tibet. I've never been there, but somehow I want to die there. The identity of push polyglots is complex, yet somehow firmly retained when allowed to do so. One of my other favorite push polyglots was a man that I met in Chicago's Little India. I don't know his legal immigration status. but the shop owners in Little India in Chicago are known for some creative employment methods of cheap labor for people who don't have legal status in America. So I was shopping for wedding clothes because I wasn't fully convinced that I wanted to fly all the way to India for the specific kind of lehenga and sari that my mother-in-law wanted me to have. I visited several shops along the way and popped into Taj Sari Palace, a musty storefront with a chaotic array for out-of-style saris from various decades. In those days, I was very adamant about practicing my Hindi because I had been away from India for a while and spoke Hindi every chance I could get. This clerk at the store and I started chatting, and given his fluency in Hindi, I assumed he was Indian. He performed the glorious ritual of putting the sari on out, like if you've ever been to India, they'll take out the sari and they'll like fling it across the room so you can see all the fabrics. And this man had that ritual down. And a lot of times the men will even drape the sari on themselves so you can see the pattern. He had it down. And it's also often customary to offer chai to customers, which he did. And we spent a good amount of time speaking in Hindi and of course, examining the different sari styles. When I was just checking out, I wanted to know his name, given the fine presentation and his convincing sales tactics. So I asked him, Bhaiya, aapka naam kya hai? Brother, what's your name? To which he replied to me, "Ah, Didi, mera naam Juan hai." Yes, sister, my name is Juan. Juan? Juan? Not Jignesh? Not Jayant? Your name is Juan? Much to my surprise, turns out Juan was from Mexico. But given his job at the Taj Sari Palace, he had learned a considerable amount of Tamil, Gujarati, Hindi, Urdu, Punjabi, Marathi, and Malayalam, etc., probably more. So much that I had confused him as Indian. Come to find out, he was also confused when I said, "Mera naam Jessica hai," my name is Jessica, and that I too was not Indian, but happened to be fluent in Hindi. We had a good laugh about it. And whenever I passed the Taj Sari Palace from that day forward, we greeted each other with a combination of namaste, como estás, and hello. I wonder how Juan's identity of being a Mexican man who lived most of his life in Chicago's Little India felt about his identity. Does he eat Indian food at home with his Mexican relatives? Does he often get confused as an Indian, as I mistook him for? How does this affect him day to day, working in a 100% Indian environment in urban America? Every time we take a taxi anywhere in India, my partner Abhishek asks people where they are from. 90% of the time when we're in a taxi anywhere in India, the answer is, "Hum to Bihari hai." Hey, I'm from Bihar. People have migrated from, many people migrate from Bihar to do jobs all over India. And oftentimes they're doing the difficult labor jobs that other people don't want to do. So most of these people have never lived in Bihar. Many of them are second, third generation Biharis in Delhi, but they still identify as I'm Bihari, even if they've lived in Delhi for 3 generations. My grandparents are from there, my ancestral village is from there, I'm a Bihari. So many generations later, people grasp to their Bihari identity, even if they've been pushed out from the homeland due to famine or lack of reasonable wages. So we've talked about push polyglot. Now let's talk about pull polyglot. Those of us who fall into the pull category may have a more fluid expression of our identity. Maybe we haven't had to struggle to retain our identity, language, or culture. For me as an American, wherever I go in the world, there are familiar things around me. My mother tongue of English is spoken in many parts of the world. There are moments when that, of course, is challenged, but for the most part, it's pretty easy for me just to kind of connect with English wherever I go. Story time. There is a responsibility that comes with being a polyglot. Maybe some of us have higher income jobs or generational wealth where we can pursue hobbies, travel, and have time to learn new things that aren't a necessity to our survival. So this is my story. When I was 23, I moved to India. I moved for work, but I accepted the position because I was interested in India. That was 16 years ago, and now I'm living in northern India with my spouse, 2 kids, and in-laws. People often tell me, "You've become Indian." But what does that really mean? Was that ever a goal? I'm not closely attached to my ethnic identity, which is mostly German, French, English, Scandinavian, and a small percentage of unknowns. I'm American, so whatever. We kind of just are very fluid about it. But I often was asked by people to change my name. Oh, you should change your name. You should change, Jessica, you should change your name to something Indian. And I just never quite felt comfortable with that. India is a place where this kind of fluidness or kind of getting sucked into becoming Indian, it can happen very easily. There's a constant pressure to conform, to be uniform, and particularly if you're married to a person of Indian origin, to become Indianized is one of many Indian folks' favorite thing to accomplish with new foreigners. Becoming Indian almost subconsciously becomes a goal. Do you like spicy food? Do you know how to wear a sari? Do you speak Hindi, Punjabi? And if you don't, a polite but disappointed smile often comes over the question asker's face. How do you maintain or retain yourself while also learning and adapting a new culture as powerful and as intoxicating as India? I'll tell you a little story about how I once had this moment come to a front. It was a birthday party, and I was about 24 years old, and I was living in a small town in India, and some girls had come over to help me get ready. It was my birthday. And I used to wear this terrible scrunchy style, which was popular in the early 2000s, where you kind of have this scrunchy hair, which is not popular in India at all. And so the girls that I was with were not very happy with my hairstyle choice. And in order to make me more Indian or more appropriate for the occasion, one of the girls grabbed a hairbrush out of my almari, my cupboard, and started brushing out my hair forcefully. You need to brush it. You need to. So she's brushing my hair, forcing me to get this terrible, messy looking, casual American hairstyle out of my hair. And at that point, I had been flowing with it. I was like, okay, I'm speaking the language, I'm wearing the clothes, but having my hair brushed out was too much for me, and I snapped. And I realized from that day forward, I think I'm going a little too far with this, feeling like I have to be accepted as Indian or this or that. And I just need to let myself be myself. And there's a line. So how can you prevent this from happening as a polyglot, this kind of cultural adaptation, but maybe you feel like you're losing yourself? First of all, I would say, language learning will be messy, accept the mess. Secondly, understanding your true motivations. You might not actually have to express these to local people, but it will come out pretty quickly. What's your motivation? Is it to be accepted? Is it to find yourself? Is your motivation of learning a language to be able to help people, to build your resume? Maybe there's a love interest involved. For me, I had a combination of all of these different points in my journey. The next thing, it's really important as a polyglot to be aware of decolonizing language learning. Another story time. As a white person in India, I've been asked to do some very strange things, and I know others who have as well. At one very unfortunate event, I was at an orphanage in Kolkata helping some of my friends who were locals, all Bengalis, who are running this orphanage, and they invited me to come visit them during Christmas. And I was asked to play Mrs. Claus at this very crowded, very it was like this wonderful show that they would put on every year for the local children. And I was asked to play Mrs. Claus. So usually this is me. I'm just cool with it. I don't care. I'll be embarrassed. I'll make a fool of myself. I don't mind. I completely missed the whole fact that because I'm a white person, I'm kind of being pulled out as this little shiny example to be just entertainment for other people. And I thought, that's fine. I don't care. It'll make everyone laugh. Doesn't matter. But there's something else behind it, which I missed. As I'm going along, I'm, ho, 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 I'm Mrs. Claus, whatever. And I'm speaking in a mix of Hindi and Bengali, and everyone's laughing. And then the local leaders of the orphanage asked me to start passing out gifts. So if you guys have ever been to different orphanages or in various countries, there's these like Christmas boxes that a lot of times people will send from overseas. And the locals had done all the work to set this up. They had done all of the setup, all of the organizing, but yet here I come and they're asking me to like give out these gifts. So I'm like receiving all this glory or this attention as being this benevolent gift giver when I didn't do anything. I just showed up. And so really, I really should have declined and said, no, you're the ones who organize this. You give the gifts out. I was being used as a token and I should have known better. This may happen more than you think. And I think particularly if the more different you are from the culture that you're learning in, I think that this is more inclined to happen. So there's a responsibility that comes with being a polyglot. If you're showing interest, if you're the one who's kind of, you can easily be put on a pedestal and make similar mistakes to what I did. Of course, number 3, white privilege has a great deal to do with it. I think being a white person, just acknowledging it is a wonderful start. If you're not white, then maybe discovering what kind of prejudices or preconceived notions people may have against you. In India, being a white person, it can be this strange combination of being highly praised or despised, especially as a woman. So it's kind of like, which one are you going to give me today? But just knowing that I will be given a lot of attention, I will be given a lot of preference for things that I did not deserve or things that I just showed up and was allowed to, get away with anything. One of my friends was working with me in India in the early 2000s. And she's African-American from Virginia. She had these beautiful, long, very well-maintained locks in her hair. And the way that she would be treated versus the way that the other women our age, white women, would be treated was shocking. So one night we were all having tea with this colleague's family, and these girls were all sitting around, and it was almost like with the other young white women and with this other African-American woman, it was almost like the Indian girls were staring at us like, I want to be you. And as this friend of mine later on said, she goes, I feel like people just look at me, they look at you and they say, well, I want to be you. And they look at me and they just so, that's different. So I'm not saying this against Indian people in general. I'm just sharing that these prejudices exist, and like being aware of them is very important and very, you have to know kind of where your level of responsibility needs to be in the process as you're learning a language. So the people that you are learning from are conditioned a certain way to behave with foreigners, and it's really, really important to figure that out. So people expect you a lot of times to use the language for your own good. people will push you into positions of power that you may or may not want to be in, and you have to prove them wrong. Know when to step back and know when to defer to the locals. My last point, and then I would love to have a discussion and take questions, is of course practicing cultural humility. Cultural humility is basically where, rather than practicing cultural intelligence, I know about this culture. I'm aware of this culture. Let me show you what I know about your culture or this culture or that culture. Instead of going that route, asking questions. Can you tell me about that? Or that's something new to me. Or, oh, I'm wrong. I actually misspoke. Maybe this was correct. Maybe I'm wrong about this. Practicing that humility and being a constant learner rather than a guru is, I think, incredibly important to the language learning process. So in the nonprofit sector, there's a whole kind of, theme of volunteerism. And I think a lot of polyglots also fall into that. I do have a whole episode on that, which talks a lot more about cultural humility versus cultural intelligence. And so at this point, I will open it up to questions. If anyone has any questions, feel free to type it in the chat or unmute yourself, and then we can have a discussion about push versus pull, polyglots, or any of the other topics that I've touched on. So I have a question. Yeah, stress. Someone is saying they have a lot of stress and confusion as a polyglot, and I think that's very common. Another person's asking, do you ever feel your identity shifting based on the situation, or is it more that you highlight certain aspects about your identity based on the moment situation? I think that there has to be kind of a core understanding of who you are, and a core sense of, I'm not going to go beyond these limits. For example, oftentimes, when people are saying, I'm just going to use myself as an example. When people say, "Oh, you're so Indian," clearly they don't mean that I myself am Indian, that I have Indian citizenship. There's so much more that actually it means to be Indian. There's a whole history, there's struggle, there's so much which I never had to experience. So not someone saying, "Oh, you're so Indian," to me, it means that you've adapted to our culture. It doesn't mean that literally you can go around calling yourself. So me going around and calling myself an Indian would be incredibly disrespectful. So if that would be one of the lines that I would kind of put out there, is knowing what your limits are and how far or how you're willing to identify in certain scenarios, and what your limits have to be as far as you're expressing your own identity. That's there. But as far as the peripheral stuff, I would say that, yeah, that there's certain things that kind of shift and change depending on the situation and who you're speaking to. And for example, I would definitely speak differently if I'm visiting the US and talking to an Indian American soccer mom who has named her kids, Ethan and Michael, and has chosen not to give Indian name, even though they are from a Gujarati Hindu family. I'm not gonna go pull out oh, let's talk all about India. Let's, I'm not gonna show myself as, oh, look how Indian I am, and how, that'd just be inappropriate to in that sense. But yet, if there's a shop owner that I meet who's owns the international grocery store down the street in the U.S. and start speaking to them, and they're speaking to Hindi with one of their colleagues, and then I would feel comfortable just kind of being more relaxed and free and just speaking and allowing, I guess, like the influence that India's had on me kind of show through, if that makes any sense between those two distinctions. As far as like my core, how I feel about myself doesn't change, but how I express that to those two people groups, depending on where they are, if that makes any sense. Okay, another question. Asking questions seems to be a good way to avoid cultural misunderstandings, but is asking a question from a good way for every culture? Aren't there cultures where things aren't said clearly, but have to be understood from the situation? Excellent question. I think that there are always, you can ask direct versus indirect questions. So, for example, in India, I would, if I'm sitting with a family and just a family who's invited me over, I'm getting to know them the first time. People would say something like, they would be explaining about their family situation. Oh, we have one daughter, हमारी एक बेटी है, एक बेटा भी है. We have a daughter, we have a son, and they're both still living at home, and they're 30 plus. The son and his wife are living there, and then their daughter, who is actually, I find out, is older, is also still living at home. So my natural, let's say I didn't know anything about kind of like the arranged marriage hierarchy of your daughter gets married first, and then once she's settled and moves to her in-laws' house, then the son gets married and will bring his wife to come live with you. So you could ask that question of, let's say I didn't know anything about that. And say, oh, okay, so so you're still at home, and then your son is also here, and okay, that's interesting. And if I were to push further and continue to ask direct questions, so how come she's older and she's not married, but you're younger and you are married? That would be a direct question that would be actually very hurtful, because clearly in this family situation, there's something which has maybe gone wrong. Maybe their older daughter was married, got a divorce. Maybe they're having a hard time finding a partner for her. Maybe the younger son eloped against the family's wishes, and that's why it was kind of out of order. Those are the kind of questions that you learn not to ask. But I think that you can ask someone else later. For example, like in those situations, you wouldn't ask a direct question of, well, how come you got married out of order? That would be hurtful for the family. But asking someone else later of, okay, I noticed that the daughter was older, but she wasn't married, and the son was younger and was married, you could kind of find out from a different source. So that would be the direct versus indirect, if that makes sense. But I think asking questions is always a good thing, just being careful if you're hurting someone from that question. Have you ever been considered pretentious for speaking English perfectly with an American accent, even though it's my native language? Well, that's the thing, right? Is like, who says that American accent is better than any other accent? We all have an accent. And I guess that I oftentimes, when I'm in India, I don't often speak with my American accent, like my just natural native accent, because maybe it would make people feel like a little uncomfortable, or if they couldn't understand me as well. Not because Indian people don't understand American accents. That's not true at all. But where I live, it's in Bihar, there's a lot less saturation of English. So for me, putting out there my or unmasking kind of my natural American accent would be like, why are you doing this? Why can't you just speak in a Bihari accent? So I think, you know, code switching is really important for all of us who are learning languages, and knowing when to use which accent and how to make someone feel comfortable, how to be understood, and how to, you know, what you're trying to communicate. If I'm trying to communicate that I'm a foreigner and I maybe am a little clueless, or maybe if I'm snobby, then sure, I could communicate with an American accent of, अच्छा चलो तो हम लोग जाएंगे तो, but I'm not really sure if I want to go there. So फिर उसके बाद हम लोग मॉल जाएंगे, फिर हम लोग खाना खाएंगे, but I don't want to have French fries today because I don't really feel like it. You know, you're like throwing in the English with the American accent is very common. People do this all the time. And it's kind of shown as a status symbol to like throw in these full, complete English sentences. And that's communicating something. But that's not necessarily the way that I want to communicate. When I'm in India, I'm not trying to like show pretentious, but I'm not trying to show that I'm an American. I'm trying to just like speak as consistently or perfectly as local. So how about when I speak Hindi, do you feel you have an accent, maybe a slight American accent? You know, my husband always likes to point out my mispronunciations. So, I mean, I guess I'm not the person to judge my accent, because I think people interpret that differently. So I'm not going to judge my own accent, because I think that would be a little pretentious. Of course, I still mispronounce things, but I think overall, I'm constantly trying to change that. And yeah, that makes sense. I know you can tell me, Rose, about my pronunciation. I know you're one of my Instagram pals here signed on. So, all right. Well, what other questions do you guys have? Any discussion we want to go further into on this topic, or pull versus push? Is anyone in here? Would you consider yourself a push polyglot? Someone who's been who maybe your family immigrated from a different country, or someone who left a country because of economic hardship. And what would you say towards that, Danny? Yeah, and you can use the mic if you want to speak up.
Hi.
Hi.
So I'm originally from Spain. I'm not sure whether I would be considered a pull or a push polyglot, to be honest. So I basically grew up in Barcelona, and I was in an orphanage because I lost my parents. And I spoke both Spanish, Castilian Spanish, and Catalan. So I guess that makes me a bilingual. And then when I was about 14, I came to the UK, and I had like foster parents. So I had to learn English. I mean, I didn't really speak English, but I was kind of forced into the situation. So would that make me a push or pull polyglot?
I think you know, you weren't necessarily learning for your own resume or interest. So I would probably put you in the push category.
Yeah. Okay.
In that sense, and maybe you could be a push or pull depending on the language. So maybe for your first languages, you would be a push polyglot, and maybe for other languages which you've learned later on, you would have been a pull.
Yeah. Okay.
And these are categories that these are not like I've just defined these categories.
Yeah, you have to think outside the box. I think
conference.
Yeah.
So
yeah, for sure.
Like,
I mean, nowadays things have changed. So I'm now learning different languages just because I kind of was brought up with many different, you know, exposed to different nationalities. So I learned Italian, a bit of French. I just basically grew really interested in languages quite when I was in my teenage years. So now I'm speaking a few languages, but that's probably not on the push category. It's more of a pull. Yeah. I don't know. I keep getting them mixed up. Sorry.
No problem. Makes sense.
All right. So that's me.
Is anyone else that might categorize themselves as a push polyglot? Maybe someone who's kind of been forced through circumstances, whether economic or war or refugee. Anyone that would put themselves in that category? See, this is the thing that I wish we would have, had more push polyglots as a part of this conference. And I think it's definitely interesting for those of us that have had the time or the ability and privilege to travel and learn. I think this is one side of the story, and I would love to hear from other people who've had kind of the other side of the language acquisition. Was anyone else going to share? I saw a few people pop up.
May I?
Yes, please.
I taught English to like from kindergarten to secondary school, and many of my students were from Arabic countries, and specifically from Iraq. Yes, Iraq, and and I guess I've had many learners that I can say push polyglots, because they had some other some of them had another language apart from Turkish and Arabic. Sometimes they had like others, like for example they one of them moved to France before moving to Turkey. That's why they knew a little French. I mean, I can say that. And also I don't know if I can call myself as a push, but I'm a minority in Turkey, and I'm learning my mother tongue. Yeah. For some reasons I couldn't learn as a child. I mean, I learned, but I forgot. Then I just moved on to another school, and I couldn't find any native speakers there. That's why I couldn't really continue with my language learning process. And then I forgot somehow. And that's all.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for sharing your story. Does anyone else have any stories they want to share?
Maybe I'll just share something, because I think it's kind of related to the topic, like Linda is saying, like how you start the learning process of a language. So for me, when I came to the UK, I only spoke Spanish and Catalan. My English was so basic, and it's funny how you may learn something in a school setting, and then you come over to the country and it is completely different than what you've been taught. It really is. I don't know if, honestly, I don't know why. Like my teacher in Spain, I just began learning English. My teacher was not native English. He was Catalan, and his pronunciation and the basic things we were taught, as soon as I arrived, I just couldn't, even people just greeting me, it sounded so different. So I really struggled. So I just basically had to learn on my own, because nobody spoke Spanish. So that was really interesting. But for example, one of the things that happened, there was an incident where we were with other children and we were all jumping on a lake. And by this time I did speak some basic English. I thought it was good enough to make myself understood. But I was still struggling. And when we all came out of the lake, there was like weeds on our toes, right? So I said I was trying to translate in my head from Spanish to English, and I was trying to say to the other child, you've got weeds on your toes, basically. But what I said is, you have weed plants on the fingers of your toes.
Yeah.
And he's like,
right.
The fingers of my toes.
Right.
And he
Right.
just laughed at me, and he was making really a lot of fun. Like, are you joking me? The fingers
Sure.
of my toes. Now, anyone who speaks Spanish here will know
Right.
what's happening, right?
Yes.
In Spanish, you've got fingers of your hand, and you've got fingers of your feet. That's how we
Yes.
say it.
Uh-huh.
If you literally translate toes in Spanish, it's fingers of the toes.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, so that was one of my first experiences going, oh my God, you can't just translate word by word, because people are going to make fun of you, right?
Sure. In Hindi, it's the same actually. पैर की उंगलियां. It's your. When you just say ungli, you just say for your hand, for your hand fingers, I guess, and then you have to clarify पैर की उंगलियां with your feet, toe fingers, I guess.
Yeah,
that's funny. So I'm just going to answer. I think there's a couple more questions, and then I guess we can wrap it up. So one of the questions here is, have you found adapting Indian culture as an American with your in-laws, as this is culturally very different to the West? We'd love to hear your experiences and how long it took to learn Hindi. So instead of boring everyone with the whole long story, I'm going to point you to my podcast, because I talk extensively about this. It's the Invisible India podcast. It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, everywhere where you can find podcasts, and also on YouTube. So it's called the Invisible India podcast, not because I think, oh, I'm representing the invisible aspects of India as a foreigner, but we really focus on cross-cultural relationships. We talk about linguistics, language learning, acquisition, raising multilingual kids quite a bit, and then also through the perspective of South Asian stereotype breakers. So one of the purposes of the show is to give another platform for South Asians who are doing something very different. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. I'm on Twitter and TikTok as well for Invisible India. And that's where I talk quite extensively about the whole process of coming to India and learning Hindi, and the last several, 15 years of my journey in India. So a few more questions. Code switching and mixing to suit whoever you're speaking to is very important. And there are often third-party naysayers that say you're making fun of the person you're speaking with. Well, I think that is a very tricky line that you have to navigate. And that's a great comment, actually, because how much do you just kind of let your natural accent flow through, or how much do you emulate the other person's accent? I don't have an answer for that, because people could be offended either way. People either might not understand you as well, or they may be offended if you're kind of modifying their accent for them. I don't have an answer for that one, because I've probably done both. What do you think? What does everyone else think? If anyone wants to raise their hand up and chime in on that one. What do you do? Do you try to emulate the person's accent who you're speaking with?
I think
you just kind of...
Yeah, I think it depends on the circumstance. It really does depend. Like, for example, I've got a friend, and she is from Uzbekistan. And she doesn't speak very well English, but she has been here for a long time. So I don't think it's going to happen. You know, it's different for everyone. You know, we all have different capabilities, different skills. It doesn't make anybody better or worse. We're just different. And she just doesn't have the linguistic skills, but she is, or maybe she's just not interested. She has other interests than language, you know. So the way I help sort of bridge that is by sort of adjusting my English so that it's more basic, you know, because I really love this friend. I don't expect her to just improve her English, you know, anytime soon. I'll be very happy to help her if she ever showed interest in it. But I really feel that I make it easy for conversation for both of us. And I don't feel that I'm patronizing at all. I really watch out to make sure that she doesn't feel that way, you know.
Sure.
But then again, somebody else may find it patronizing if they have a better linguistic skills or they are trying to improve, you know. So it really depends on the individual person. Sure. Yeah, that's what
Anyone else? Heather, Sophia, Ella, Emily, Israel, Victoria, Nicole, Michael. Anyone have anything to add? Anita, Boris?
I would say, well, this is Nicole. I would say that like Rose said, it depends on the person. Like the goal at the end of the day, I feel is just for communication. So, and also it depends on the relationship. If the person knows that you have an American accent and can understand you with the American accent, then I would say go with the American accent. But if you feel like, you know, the person, like if you feel like you need to speak more slower or more basic with them, like Rose says, I think you can do that too. I feel like at the end of the day, it's just communication and making the person feel welcome and feel that they're being heard and communicated. And I want to also say thank you for bringing up code switching, because like I feel like code switching is like can be also within the language, because like for English, you know, they're like in this, you know, with the growth of hip hop, like people will use a lot of slang, and you know, so it's like people don't talk. Like I kind of notice, like I live in the area where there's a lot of international students, and I instantly know where they're from another country because they speak better English than some Americans and stuff. And there are certain words, if they're like, for example, you're from India, and like India was, I know, colonized by British, and I know sometimes when they say like I'm looking for a flat, I know right there is, oh, if they're saying apartment, and I'm like, okay, they're not from the, you know, country. So
good point. Yeah,
this is Anita with BhashaKids, and you know, I would just say it's the same as Thai. I hope I said your name right in the comments. It really just depends on who I'm with and where I am. When I'm in India, I will naturally acclimate and have an Indian accent. If I go to New York, I'm going to be talking like my cousins, like I'm from New York. If I go to Miami, I start sounding like I'm Cuban. So it's not something that I intentionally effectuate. It just naturally happens. I think that's what the dividing line is. You can tell when someone is not being authentic, and they are just, you know, they're just putting it on. And yeah, I think it just, you can tell the difference because it comes down to who's authentic.
That's a great point. Who else has something to add on this? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
no one else
I guess I could. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that, like, this is a really good point. So there's the accent that can, you know, I also find when I'm with my Spanish friends, I wind up having a stronger accent, or Catalan friends. You know, it varies depending on where you are, who you're with, and that sort of thing. But going back to what you were saying on the actual register, that's the word that came to me, because I started reading up on linguistics, and they have a word for it. So it's called register. So register is the language that you use, that you choose to use from the vocabulary that you know in any given language, to adapt to a specific person that you're talking to. So you don't talk the same way when you go to a job interview than you talk to your child, for example. So you use a different register depending on the person, the circumstances, and yeah, that word probably sort of defines where you change your language requirements. Yeah, I think. And it also changes, like, yeah, for hip hop, for example. So you've got music, and there's a different register that is used for this kind of activity than when you go to work or you go to the gym. You use a different register with your friends as well. And it also depends on what kind of friendship you've got with them.
Sure.
Yeah. So
Definitely. Yeah. All right. Well, anyone else have anything to add before we wrap it up? I think we've had a wonderful conversation about, I mean, mostly it was me talking at the beginning, but, you know, I'm really thankful that all of you signed on. And I wanted to also thank Richard for organizing, and Avishta with Lingua-Cultura as well, for inviting me and for doing so much to coordinate and organize. And I'm really glad that we could all be here and chat. Let's stay connected. You can find my podcast on invisibleindiapodcast.com, and then you can connect personally with me. My email, everything is on the site where you can find my show. And then I'm on Instagram. It's probably where I'm most active on social media. And I put the link in the comments here. So thank you everyone so much for attending, and I hope you all have a great day, evening, wherever you are.